on the Alive website in just a few days afterwards. But we do hope that this is an interactive discussion, so feel free to raise your hand if you have questions as well, and we can take you off mute that way. We do have some announcements.
Amy, I don't see your screen.
Oh, you don't see my screen. Oh no. Let me try and share again. Sorry about that. Is it there now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. We do have a few announcements coming up. We are looking for our first executive director for Alive. So if you are in the volunteer engagement profession, interested in working with a team, a small but mighty team that's making a huge difference, please consider applying. We also have openings on our Alive Board of Directors. So board service is a great opportunity to grow personally and professionally. Those nominations are open now and will close on August 16th. We are, hopefully you've heard about what we are doing to advocate for our profession, adding the official occupation code with the Department of Labor. We are having a webinar on August 1st at 3 p.m. Eastern. Hope that you will join us to learn more about these efforts, how you can get involved. There's a public commentary that's open and need all comments submitted by August 12th. So very timely way to advocate. A few more announcements. We have our Alive Academy in August. On August 15th, we're going to be talking about enhancing volunteer engagement metrics. And that is with one of our board members, Jordania Reeves. We also are accepting applications for our Impact Award nominations, and that closes on August 15th. So lots of things are happening at Alive. You can always come back to our website to find out more about all of this exciting stuff. Our final announcement, we do have the host registration open for the hybrid conference, which is happening in October 22nd and 23rd. The individual attendee registration will open on August 1st. So check into the conference website so you can learn more information about that. Okay, so now to introduce our presenter. Today we're joined by David, who is going to talk about our market research, and we're so excited to pass it over to him.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Gretchen. I'm excited to be here. I am going to take a second to set up and share my screen the right way so I don't have to do it again later. Let's see. Okay, so everything is, you can see the slides just fine?
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. All right, well, I'm excited to be here today because I love communications and volunteerism. And it's so much easier than what people think. Market research, understanding our markets, understanding how to communicate better with our potential audiences. And so looking forward to sharing some simple tips and tricks, and specifically one major method that I call the Swiss Army knife of market research. Let's see, today might feel a little more like a class. I teach at Johns Hopkins University, and so what I was trying to do is really distill a whole semester of information into one hour-long presentation. I don't know if I did the best job, but we'll be talking about the importance of marketing research, kind of not just for marketing or for communications, but for product development, for program development, for fundraising, and then we'll talk about some tools and how to specifically apply it within communications. But a little bit about me first. Why am I here? Well, I feel like I'm the intersection of comms and volunteerism. I'm a communications practitioner. I have my education background in communications, and as of last year, and thanks to Karina Sadler, who was my live mentor, I received my CBA last year and have been working for a decade in volunteer engagement, digital and community outreach, and nonprofit program management. So, like many of you, I've been interested in volunteerism for a very long time. In fact, my first volunteer role was as our elected grounds commissioner in 5th grade. And I was organizing volunteers for school beautification and recycling programs. And I did that in elementary school and did, kind of student government and youth group, social action, organizing in high school and in college. And so I have been very passionate about volunteerism for a long time. And because of that, I got my BA and my MA in communications because I was really focused on how to improve communications and marketing for nonprofits. I see that corporate entities and other large organizations with a lot of funding and resources for this work are very successful, and I thought that nonprofits could use more. And actually, my uncle has an advertising agency, and I think he was part of that, the impetus for my focus on communications and marketing. I have taught a course in communications campaigns at Georgetown University and currently teach graduate seminars in marketing and communications research at Johns Hopkins. And I've spent most of my career outside of school at the intersection of communications, program management, and volunteerism. I currently manage the volunteer experience at AARP Foundation and develop and implement communications and engagement strategies to increase the recruitment and the retention of our volunteers, and sometimes work on recruiting funders and partners. And prior to the foundation, I managed outreach campaigns for tens of thousands of volunteers who annually reached over 50 million people with positive messages about chemistry. So it was such a fun time managing the National Chemistry Week campaign and others at the American Chemical Society. And I also love service myself. And so I find that if I'm not doing direct service while also doing volunteer management, then it feels like a little disconnected and a little not totally kind of keeping up with best practices today. And so I've been appointed to DC Mayor Bowser's, the State Service Commission for DC, or Serve DC, and we oversee AmeriCorps grant administration, volunteer activation and recognition, and nonprofit capacity building. And so while I've had many other volunteer roles, I've also chosen to spotlight a few here that are specifically in marketing. When I lived in Oakland, California, I was on the marketing committee for San Francisco Zoo 2, which was our local young professionals organization, and currently continue to support DC nonprofits with marketing and communication efforts. I recently ran a successful local city council campaign for a friend, Kareem, for Ward 3, which was really fun and new and kind of just a way to do what I do on a national scale locally, and also have become an alive committee member with the marketing committee. So it's been awesome to work with Grace and team on that. And I think one thing, if you look at my resume, there's like a common denominator that I'm passionate and have this ability to leverage communications and build relationships to raise awareness and to mobilize people towards action. And I think that's what we're all successfully trying to do. And part of that success comes from really understanding what the people want, right? Like what is it that will get people excited and motivated? So I'm excited to share, but I also wanted to share that I'm the proud father of 19 houseplants. I'm a recipe-free cook, and also the founder of a non-existent nonprofit that I free to reach out. So today we're going to start a little bit with the need for marketing and talking about potential solutions, and then also dive into some qualitative marketing research techniques. Again, I call are the tools that I use my Swiss Army knife of marketing research. And we'll apply that to several scenarios in which you can use it, specifically today in communications, but I would love to have a discussion about other applications of our Swiss Army knife. And then I think that please feel free to ask questions throughout the discussion. I know that it may feel more like my class, and so I'd like to, in my class, we always have rich discussions as we go, rather than saving everything to the end. Maybe if there are things that aren't so related, feel free to parking lot them, and we can discuss at the end. But feel free also to use the Q&A feature throughout the presentation. So why is marketing research important? I guess maybe I want to do a little bit of a poll. I'd love to know how many of you have done, kind of formal market research or marketing research, or even communications research on your audience. Let us know in the chat if there are things that you've done that have proven particularly successful in helping you craft your messaging or change your communication strategy, better market opportunities to fundraisers and to partners. So I'll give you a moment to talk about any kind of market research experience you have. Informally. Scrolling through social media. I think that's a common one today. Just casually asking folks for anecdotal evidence. A marketer by training on the call, so I've done marketing research. That's awesome. Olympia, you should just be on with me. Liza, not formal, but looking at email newsletter stats to see what works. Awesome. Focus group surveys. Marketing chair for local association. Pulling numbers, a lot of analytics, right? A lot of reach and engagement data. So that's an interesting aspect of marketing research. Absolutely, I think, and maybe perhaps program managers are more responsible for analyzing and understanding the reach and the engagements that we have with our marketing, but may not necessarily understand or have the tools to research content and how to create and strategize around marketing content specifically in channels and other aspects. So today we're really going to focus on more about using insights from what's going on in the field and how our audience is feeling to create some of those and develop some of those strategies to proceed. I try to pay attention. Yeah. Awesome. Well, so I think, starting off with the need, we see it in Toby Johnson's report, or the Volunteer Management Progress Report, every year, and in so many other studies. The task of volunteer managers, most importantly, is recruitment. Over 83% of y'all conduct recruitment. And so I know that that means different things for different people and different organizations, but it is indeed a major aspect of our work. And also, it was interesting to me to see that 60% of volunteer managers are responsible for partnerships, and yet only 30% of volunteer managers consider any part of their work marketing. I know that this may be very biased, but so much of what I perceive that we do is marketing, and whether it's persuading volunteers to take a training module, or persuading programs, if you're working in a network model, to adopt certain practices or procedures. And so to me, marketing doesn't just end with kind of formal advertising to external audiences, but really understanding our own audiences and how we're not just creating an impact externally, but how we're also amplifying our impact internally. But what's more about the volunteer management progress report is that volunteer managers continue to cite recruitment as their #1 challenge. So almost a third struggle with recruitment. We know that retention and buy-in from management are other key concerns, and I'm here to argue that those two things are also things that we can address by understanding our audience a little better and understanding our environment better. I think mostly these challenges are a result of a lack of funding or a lack of resources that are allocated towards marketing. In fact, nonprofits are recommended to spend 5% of their budgets on marketing, which seems wild to me because Salesforce suggests that small businesses using their product spend about 18 to 23% on marketing, on their overall budget on marketing. I think the lower end, 18%, is more focused on business to business marketing, and the higher end, direct to consumer, 23% for businesses advertising direct to consumer. So we know that direct to consumer marketing is more expensive and than it is for business to business. And we also know that budgets for corporate or small businesses are more than 3 times the size of nonprofits generally. So what is the solution? Let's see, Gretchen, fun fact, when I managed a McDonald's restaurant in the 90s, every McDonald's had to give 5% to the national office for advertising. And so what did that mean for the local office, right? And for your local advertising efforts, if there was any? 2 years ago, Rob Jackson wrote a blog post, and last year he did an Alive Academy titled "Recruitment is Not the Answer." And I totally agree with him. And I say this all the time at work. That's the end. That's the very end of a long chain of activities needed to be successful in growing our community and understanding our audience, and be successful in amplifying our work. But so while I say that recruitment is not the answer, understanding your market and your audience is always part of the solution. Whether you're recruiting or onboarding or training or recognizing volunteers or anything else, to me, it is vital that you understand your audience to ensure that your efforts are meeting people where they're at. So a major part of the solution is to start with understanding what the heck else is going on out there. And that's where market research comes in. It's key to understanding the environment that you're operating in, including the needs and the preferences of your current and future volunteers, partners, and funders. And one more quote, that there is a very common saying in marketing, which is that if you're selling to everybody, you're selling to nobody. And so if you're in this modern and digital world that we're in today, we're constantly bombarded by huge amounts of information. So if we're not speaking to our specific audiences or our specific group or personas within our audience, there's just a good chance that you're not attracting people because of that. If your messages are too vague, if you're not kind of targeting specific people. And so that's where marketing research really comes in, is to understand which messages might attract which audiences. In order to address this, marketing professionals have also long been interested in and focused on the funnel and creating a funnel. So if we take that classic marketing funnel and apply it to volunteer engagement, you can see that audience members become leads, who become prospects, who then become successfully recruited, or can be successfully recruited. But we've gotten to a place where there's so much information and there's so many organizations competing for the attention of our consumers So even bringing successful recruits in the door is no longer enough to have a robust, sustainable recruitment pipeline. We know that at work, 33% of our volunteers come through word of mouth. And while that's, and I think that's a national average, but I think, while that's great for leveraging word of mouth resources and strategies, there's still 66% of volunteers who aren't coming in through word of mouth, and we need to target them, and we can do a better job at that as well. So I'm proposing that we use a different model in the volunteer engagement field, and one that's been kind of shifting in the marketing field. The marketing profession has really started to see audiences as themselves assets. And so if we apply this to volunteer engagement, it's probably something you've already known to be true for your organization. It's not just about recruiting individual volunteers or volunteers during recruitment season. It's how we're really engaging and building our community of supporters year round. And so one way to look at that is the content marketing funnel. And instead of, I'm going to go back for just reference, but instead of a funnel where it starts with a wide funnel and ends in fewer volunteers or followers, you're starting with a smaller funnel through content, very specific content, and you're ending up with a larger community in this framework. So that is the role of market research. It's to understand in the funnel what information, what motivations and different motivations of different segments of your audiences will contribute to recruiting different segments of your eventual community and keeping those individuals engaged throughout the year and invested in your work. And because you know how to communicate with them, you know how to keep them engaged, you know how to you know what their needs and preferences are. So to gather data about our market and your audience and the people within your audiences, we look at kind of the whole market. And I'm not going to go into the whole market today, but what we're targeting specifically is the target market, the penetrated market, which is your audience, the audience segments within your segments, and then those personas of individuals within your audience segments that you use those characteristics from those personas to attract more individuals from your other audience segments. So I guess I wanted to, for some reason, start with some basic understandings or definitions of target audience. So your target audience is your specified group of people who is the target of your outreach, your recruitment, your campaigns, your fundraising, with whom you want to connect. And they are part of a larger target market, which is the group of consumers who could potentially be interested in your mission, in your products, in your services. And without a target audience, you really run the risk of wasting money on your communications work, or sometimes even hurting your brand or your image if you're putting out language and messaging that is not aligned with your audience. So for example, all of those times where organizations respond to kind of current events or things in the public, those always start with a keen understanding of who their audiences are. So if you're putting out a message about the election, for example, this year will be huge, and organizations will decide whether or not to weigh into the election. Really having an understanding of your audience will be key to not hurting your brand or your image in your community. And we also want to understand what those segments are of our audience. These can be subgroups within your main target audience that are different based on their demographics, their psychographics, their needs. So like in that last example, do you have a majority of conservatives or a majority of liberals in your organization? Do they care about the election? Do they not care about the election? Those are things that you'd want to know, and you'd want to know that and understand the segments of your audience before communicating in that way. There are other ways to classify the segments of our audience, though, other than demographics, psychographics. Also, things like the channels they use. If you're looking to target virtual volunteers, you're not going to send out a print ad in the local newspaper. I don't think you should send out a print ad in the local newspaper. You'd want to use digital tools to recruit volunteers who may be better fit for that volunteer opportunity. If there are barriers to volunteering, is another kind of way that we can segment groups. If you're working with older adults, as I am, we need to understand what those barriers are and kind of create opportunities, maybe new products or services that will help those individuals to stay involved or get involved. So understanding segments is key to understanding our audience overall, but also how we cater different messages to different folks. And last but not least, within audience segments, we have personas. And I'm not going to go too much into personas right now because Jennifer Bennett covered personas maybe 2 years ago on an Alive Academy, and everyone's been talking about personas in the last few years. But they are groups of individuals that have similar qualities. And really the way that we can align our messaging with our audiences is by building a profile of our individuals that are serving or that are engaging with us so that we can deliver the right messages at the right time. So with all of that in mind, the first step of understanding your audience is starting with a goal. You can't start and you can't improve your communications. You can't improve your marketing. You can't create a new training module without having a goal. And you can't do this type of research without having a goal. Because you don't really know what you're looking for. So starting with the goal in mind and having a guidepost is really what's most important. Are you recruiting? Is that what your goal is? Are you crafting fundraising or other communications to engage audiences? Are you creating new training products? Are you selecting new partners? Or are you are you selecting new partners with whom to work? And so all of these are common processes in nonprofits, and that you can start always with an understanding of your audience and your environment to do any of these kinds of tasks. Olympia asked, do you follow the marketing rule of 7? For this unfamiliar, the rule of 7 asserts that customers should encounter your marketing message at least 7 times before making a purchase or decision. Absolutely. So the research shows that 5 to 7 times customers customers buy products after seeing your product 5 to 7 times, or people vote for a candidate after seeing 5 to 7 times. Know that it's not just about the kind of the content that you're doing. It's also about channels and making sure that you're meeting your audience in multiple channels. And so we'll discuss that in a little bit when we talk about a channel analysis. But that's a really good point, Olympia. Thank you. Sources of marketing data. And so once we, once we have our goal, right, then we can start to think about what data we need to collect. And so one thing is that marketing data can be focused either externally on what others are doing out in the world. Marketing data can be focused on externally what you've communicated out to the world. It could focus on what people are saying about your brand, or other ways that messaging and content shows up about your organization or about the products and services that you're providing to the public. And then there's internal. There's a lot of ways that marketing data can be used and found internally. So you can review all of your products, your websites, your channels. And you can do more of like an internal assessment of your training resources. You could do an internal assessment of your onboarding documents and see maybe there are gaps that your audience is expecting that maybe you're not providing. I think today we're going to focus on one really simple, cost-effective, and non-intrusive way to better understand your audience. And so in my class, I talk about marketing on a shoestring budget. Well, this is that. And I also like to call it today, I'm going to call it my Swiss Army knife of marketing research, because it truly is a simple, easy, and effective way to learn about our audience and our market. And that's the comp analysis or the comparative analysis. So how many of you, I'd love to see in the chat, use the comp analysis for anything that you do at work, whether that's conducting a landscape analysis of potential partners or funders, whether that's doing a messaging analysis and figuring out what content is missing from your communications plan. Is there anybody that uses the comp analysis a lot? Anybody as much as I do, which is I use it a lot. So the comp analysis is a process that compares and contrasts two things to identify their similarities and differences. Very simple, but it really can help us understand how our products and services and messaging are helping us to better understand how we stand out in the field, or what information we're putting out there in the field and how it and how it's different from kind of what people are expecting or people are seeing elsewhere. And so for the remainder of the workshop, I'm going to apply the comp analysis specifically to communications, but we can also think through, and I would love to have a discussion afterwards about how others have used or will use or can use a comp analysis. So first, as I said earlier, a comp analysis can be really internal or external. Internally, you can use it to decide whether or not you are allocating your resources appropriately. That if you look across departments and you look across others or kind of like examples online, figuring out what is appropriate for allocating resources. You could use it for brand consistency. So if you're looking at your website, if you're looking at your social media or your kind of print ads or anything that you've put out with your brand on it, looking across all of the products that you've kind of put out there would be helpful and a very helpful way to understand what messages you're putting out there across the board. And maybe identifying gaps of messaging. Externally, comp analysis can help us understand how other people perceive us or how other organizations perceive us. So if your organization gets a lot of media coverage, which is not too common, but if it does, then you could analyze how your organization is discussed in the news compared to how other similar organizations are discussed in the news. If your organization shows up a lot in the news versus other organizations show up a lot in the news, then that's a gap that you've identified with this analysis or a comp analysis externally. You can also understand people's insights about your organization if you do a comp analysis of or a content analysis of individuals' comments on your blog posts or on your social media. Or you might also look to other organizations' blog posts to figure out what other people are saying or needing or feeling about other organizations. would a communications audit or social media audit be considered a type of comp analysis? Absolutely. Kind of comp analysis is the umbrella term for comparing two things. And when used in communications, it takes a large amount of data and reduces it into kind of just helpful insights. So that actually leads me to my next slide. How this comp analysis works, goal ultimately is to reduce large amounts of data so that you can glean insights from it. So if you're thinking about social media, when you have thousands of words in social media posts from individuals commenting, really understanding the voice of the consumer and what they're expecting from your organization. Again, if you're a small organization and looking to mimic or replicate what's going on in larger or national organizations, then checking out what's happening on their social media pages and how they're communicating about their work. It's very sequential. So what you want to do is really create a sequence for analyzing the data that you find in social media posts. You always want to have a goal, as I stated earlier, with your campaigns or with your analyses. And you always want to do kind of the data collection and the analysis concurrently so that you're continuing to understand all the information that you're bringing in and so that you can you see the big picture while making really detailed recommendations and insights. And that's where meaning creation comes in, is those details and insights. And essentially your ultimate goal is to establish a trail of evidence of how to proceed with your communication strategy. Okay, so at work leadership always wants to see the rationale for how decisions were made. This is a way that you can justify your communications campaigns or your fundraising campaigns, is to establish a trail of evidence by documenting specifically all this data that you're getting and compiling, and it makes it easier to show the thought and the intent behind your communication strategy when you're able to kind of show that trail of evidence for your communications. So some simple steps. First thing, establish your goal. So here, my example is to create key messaging. So at the, every few years, if there are major changes within our organization, we want to make sure that we do an audit of our messaging and figure out what our new key messaging will be. So you may have a one-pager of talking points for your board members, or you may have a slide deck that's used to create all of your different slides for different and various audiences. It's important to have that key messaging. And the way to create that key messaging is to figure out what messages you're already sending. And so the first step would be to pick a source, or you choose all your sources, and review your website. Check out all the pages that has general information about your organization. You might also use your website and look at all of your different various offerings or your programs and decide how to build that into your messaging or update your messaging with new ways of thinking about how to think about your offerings. You could decide, again, to review internal and external media. You could review data and categorize. So then you want to review the data. And we're going to get into the data a little more in the next section on the applications. But essentially, you want to look for what words you're using across the board, what context you've written this messaging in that has framed the way that you're thinking about your work and that others might think about your work. You want to look for consistency. Maybe there's a page that says, that your programs specifically cater to one audience, and then there's a more general statement about who your programs cater to on another page, you need to decide whether or not you're using more general language or more specific language about who your audience targets or who your offerings target.
David,
Yeah.
you've got a question from Olympia in the chat. Would a communications audit or social media audit be considered a type of comp analysis?
Yeah, I definitely would be considered a comp analysis. The comp analysis is a simple tool that compares to at least two different sources to create insights that can help us with how to proceed or how to create strategy. So that's essentially the method. I think it's been very general so far. So I would love to know if you have any questions specifically about the importance of market research or about the importance of identifying your audience or about or specifically about the comp analysis and how it can be applied. In a moment, we will talk about specific applications. For example, last year I had an intern conduct a comp analysis of our website compared to 7 other websites. And it was really helpful for us to see where the gaps were in what information others were providing and what information we should include in any future website revamps. You might even consider using it for imagery and things like that. So that's what we're going to get into next. Just want to make sure answering any questions that may be arising. Okay.
David, this is Gretchen, and I think it's just a great way to reach out to your colleagues and, do this as a joint effort and everybody check each other's website or whatever it is they're auditing, because you still know the context that you're looking for. But I know I'm guilty of this. I can look at something 20 times and still miss it because you've looked at it 20 times.
Totally. Yeah, and actually that, recently in the last few years, we conducted a benchmarking study, which is also a type of comp analysis. And we compared ourselves to 7 other partners. And this was done by one of our third-party evaluators. And those, kind of similar organizations or programs then opted into working with us to look at things internally that we may not otherwise see. And so they conducted this benchmarking study to help us figure out and determine our unique value proposition and what makes us unique compared to others. And sometimes you can't always see that based on external websites. So this is definitely an example of how you'd want to work with partners or similar organizations or friends to glean insights internally that can help you change your operations or focus on other aspects of your work, or like what we had to determine our unique value proposition and what makes us special. Awesome idea. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so one example of a comp analysis, it can be an audience analysis. You might choose to compare your audience between organizations. You might review the data to just better understand your audience and who those audience segments are. And the way we do that is through looking at surveys about who our demographics we're serving, who are what the attitudes of our volunteers are, the behaviors of our volunteers, if there are questions that you're specifically trying to answer. Again, going back to that example of the virtual tutors and recruiting virtual tutors, if you're looking for volunteers who use the computer a few times a day, you may want to survey your own volunteers, ask who uses the computer a few times a day, and then try to understand what about that audience segment makes them unique. So then you can use messages that will work with that audience for other audiences. So, kind of splicing your data in a way that will tell you what the demographics are, what their other likes and dislikes are, when they're generally available. for example, with the virtual tutoring, we know that virtual tutors are more likely to have more jobs, more day jobs. And so making sure that we're targeting our messaging and using messaging that meets those volunteers or those types of volunteers where we're at. And so we've launched this year's kind of tutoring campaign or virtual tutoring recruitment campaigns with messaging that says you may, be at work, or this is an easy way to get involved while you're still at work, and things like that. So that is an example of how you use an understanding of your current audience to create messaging that will attract new audiences. You may also use your understanding of your current audience to figure out who you want to target, maybe an ideal audience or an aspirational audience. So this is a good idea for organizations looking to increase the diversity of their volunteer pool, or increase the representation of their volunteer pool in serving their community. For example, in one location, we went in and did a survey or tried to analyze the data about a certain audience that we wanted to increase representation from that audience. And so, for example, a Latina, a Hispanic audience in Arizona, or a Black audience in Cleveland. And then you take the data from those audiences and you look at, in that community, in that program, where you might find or what the similar behaviors are, or what the demographic qualities are of these individuals, and use that information to go and then conduct your campaigns that will get you closer to that audience. You may just rule out other practices. For example, this year we ruled out huge social media campaigns for recruiting volunteers for our local programs, because we found that over 80% of volunteers that we get through social media campaigns are white women. And so we already have a higher percentage or about that in certain locations. And so using different channels, ruling out certain channels and using different channels to make sure that we're accomplishing our goal of increasing our diversity. A channel analysis is another application of the comp analysis. So, looking at other organizations and whether or not how they're posting content. For example, if you look at 7 similar organizations and find that they all have a page that's about us and a web page that's about our impact, then perhaps you'd want to look for and create one if you don't already have one. If you have a volunteer position description on your website, or if you don't, then you may want to look at what else other people are doing outside of that. In blog posts, recently we did a comp analysis to determine what kind of blog content other organizations are putting out about their programs, to identify if there are any gaps in our posts about blogs, or in our posts on blogs. Press releases, same thing, and social media, same thing. I think it really, perhaps what a comp analysis does best is help you recognize where your gaps are or what you're not doing, to help you determine if you need to do them. In our website analysis, we also looked at the imagery. What kind of imagery are other websites using and other programs using that we aren't? And should we consider adding imagery around that? And one example was on our webpage, we only had imagery of volunteer and student, and only up close and personal images of volunteer and student. Whereas when we looked across the board, we found that there are a lot of other organizations and websites that have big group photos of communities, and that's not surprising. But it was an easy way for me to establish a trail of evidence when I went to the marketing team and said, hey, I want to add this photo to this webpage. So there are kind of a lot of different examples of how we look across channels to determine whether or not we have a gap, and then using that data from your analysis to advocate for a change in your strategy. Tammy is struggling to identify market niches in Northern Virginia for long-term admin volunteers willing to work 4 to 8 days a week, or 4 to 8 hours a day, as well as bilingual volunteers that read, speak in both languages. Do you have research or marketing strategy tips for them? Let me think about that one and come back to it. I think we could just close out the slides. There's just a few remaining slides, and then we can start maybe there with the discussion with that question. Thanks, Tammy. So a media analysis is doing the same thing with media coverage of your organization, or with social media or other types of posts that other people are able to view and comment. Not just things that people can view and comment, but also press coverage. How many people is it reaching? What are the mentions? What the tone and sentiment? We want to know how the public feels about us. And if we do an analysis of, if you're a large organization that gets a lot of media coverage, you set parameters to determine all of the news articles that were written about your organization within a certain time frame or around a certain event, and determine whether or not that's the press coverage that you're hoping to achieve, or if it didn't achieve your intended goals. If your press release or if your event isn't, then what are you going to do next time that you have this same event, or you have kind of a major occasion that you need to work on your messaging this next time around to make sure that it gets communicated in the way that you want to see it communicated. In content analysis, when you're thinking about website content, you want to look at several kind of different variables that happen. You want to look at the words, you want to look at the context. I think we talked about that, and consistency a little bit before. You might also look for frequency of the amount of times you use certain words, or the amount of times that you kind of have that content in different places on your website. You want to think about specificity. So one thing you can do is look across 7 other organizations' main web pages and decide if your content is specific enough, and sharing the actual impact and the actual opportunities in ways that are as specific as other people are talking about their work. In press releases, if you have very emotion-filled press releases, the intensity of or website or any kind of content, the intensity of your words, and the generalizability, how general are your words that will attract kind of a more general audience, or how specific your words might be. And last but not least, there's something called the messaging ladder framework, which is a type of messaging analysis. And there are 3 kind of levels of messaging. One is our first step is the facts and the figures and the kind of general description of your organization. The second step is your strengths or your differentiators, what sets you apart. And your third kind of step, or in the ladder, is your character, your personality. And so when you're looking across messaging, across your channels, across your communications, you want to look to make sure that you have all 3 steps. And you want to make sure that it starts with step 1, with facts. If you don't have the facts and the strengths about your organization, then it's hard for people to understand the character and the personality and really trust that. People really want to start with each of these steps in order to understand who your organization is and what impact they have and what sets them apart. And so I think that's all I've got. I know that was a lot. Wow, I can't believe it's so long. But I would love to answer questions now. So Tammy, I'm going to get back to your question, and then maybe we'll have to think about it a little more, and happy to chat offline. Jennifer Flynn, are there guidelines around this if we wanted to do something like this ourselves, coming from somebody that doesn't have a marketing background? Yeah, and I was going to create a template that we can put up on a live website, just a simple template that can help. I was thinking a website, but also happy to if there are any kind of specific channels that you want to analyze or specific activities, happy to think through and make that work. Liza said, when looking at other organizations' websites, social media, how do I assess what they're doing is successful and therefore something that my organization should try? That's a great question. I think one reason why what is happening in the field. And you can determine for your goal and for your audience what is best. So you might look at 3 different food pantries across the city and determine which content across the city is more successful. You might look at national organizations. Generally, a lot of marketing is just looking at what's going on in the field and figuring out what will work for you. And sometimes it's hard to say what's going to be successful. It's absolutely hard to say what's going to be successful. The goal is to get us as close to an evidence-based success as possible by collecting as much data about what's going on outside of our organization and with our audiences as possible. I hope that answered the question. Yes, thank you. Awesome. Okay, sir, your goal. And then do an analysis also of organizations who serve your target population, and then compare those 2 things and decide, well, here's what's happening in my community. Here's what other organizations that serve our population are doing. And here's how we take those insights to create a strategy that works best for us. It sounds like this was taped, recorded, and you can share with your team members. Absolutely. Any other questions? Let me go back to Tammy. Mhm. So if we decide that we want to use a different place to do our recruitment marketing to attract a more diverse volunteer group, how do we decide where to go? So there's a couple of ways that I can immediately think of about where to go based on your aspirational audience. First, if you survey your own volunteers or your own audiences, and there's a subset of volunteers within your audience that you want to target, you then look at the other qualities or characteristics or behaviors or locations or affiliations of those individuals and work with them to co-design outreach that would fit in that audience if you're not in that audience. If you might also look to what other organizations are doing. So if you can figure out, or if you work with local partners that are really successful in recruiting that type of audience, you'd want to compare and contrast who your organization is, what qualities your organization kind of contains, and what you're doing versus what's different from what they're doing in order to attract that audience. So there's kind of internal and external ways to look at that. So you might find that your target audience is currently or like 10% of your current audience. Did I say your current audience? Your aspirational audience is 10% of your current audience. And so you'd want to look at, well, do they go to the grocery store? Or is there information within your annual survey or within anything that you have? Or maybe you even bring together a focus group of those individuals to help you determine or come up with strategies for of where to target or seek out others in that community. When working in that, you definitely want to focus on co-creating the design and working together with and not kind of for a different audience, but making sure that they're a part of that design effort. We do a lot of recruitment at churches, but not a lot of churches of color. So absolutely, that is a place to start. And are there any volunteers within your ranks or within your tools that you can help that can help you with that work to make sure that we're not tokenizing or we're not that we're making sure that it's respectfully done and that it's done with the best intent, which is to have better representation in our volunteer pool and better serve individuals. Yeah. I know it's a little weird to say like target audience, but it's important to align your mission and your goals with your audiences, and so that's why the word targeting is used. Okay, well, I feel like people are slowly leaving, so I want to say thank you for having me. This was fun. It was a little difficult for me to figure out how to put all of the most important information from one class for a semester in just an hour. So I appreciate everybody being willing to experiment with me, and I'm happy to share any information or resources that I have. So feel free to connect if you want kind of more of that application. I feel like definitely next time I'll focus more on application and making sure that people have tools in hand by the time they leave. But if you want tools in hand, please reach out. I'm happy to help. Yeah. So thank you again. Good luck, everybody, with recruitment and fundraising and other market analyses.
Awesome. Thank you, David. I have put the evaluation link in the chat box. We'd love to get your feedback. This was a session full of great information and lots of engagement, lots of questions, lots of answers. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you to David for hosting and answering all those questions and really having a live academy today. So again, this link for the evaluation is in the chat box as well. Just a reminder, if you are not already a member of Alive, please consider joining us. We do have individual, association, or pay what you can memberships available. And if you are looking for more resources, like all of those events we talked about at the beginning, you can find them at volunteeralive.org. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook as well. And then if you have further questions, Gretchen Jordan is our Live Administration Manager, and you can reach her manager at volunteeralive.org. So thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you next month.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. We'll see everybody next month. Thank you, Amy.
Mm-hmm.